Today's installment of this tutorial on resonance is going to start with a pop quiz. I would like you to tell me in the comments, after you're done liking the video and subscribing to this channel, what you feel is the difference in resonance between the following two sounds. I'll reveal the answer in the next video. But for this video, all I want you to do is tell me what you think is the difference in resonance between these two sounds. Let's start with sound number one. Again, sound number one. One more time. And now let's hear sound number two. Again, sound number two. One more time, sound number two. What is the difference in resonance between these two sounds? And welcome back to the New School Singer. I'm your host, Philippe, but since we are all friends here, you can call me Mr. Opera. And we're continuing with this series on resonance and specifically ways of visualizing resonance. This information is a kind of knowledge. Knowledge means that it's something that helps you make decisions. New School Singing, in a way, could be said to be a system for making decisions about your singing. And in that sense, it's all knowledge. The knowledge we're talking about is going to come from an app called Vocal Tract Lab. Vocal Tract Lab is going to be similar to what we used last time to visualize resonance, but as you'll see, it has some limitations, believe it or not, that Pink Trombone does not have, despite all the extra capabilities. We're going to be using Vocal Tract Lab to look at acoustic areas of interest, which I defined in the last video. So if you haven't watched the last video, that's the first video in this tutorial, then I think you should do that before going on, because none of this is going to make sense, and I'm going to have a million comments in the comment section asking me why I use this term that nobody else uses. The reason nobody else uses it is I made it up, but the reason I made it up is a good one. So go and watch the first video and you will know what the acoustic areas of interest are, and you'll also know how they're labeled, which is going to be crucial today. What we're going to have today that we didn't have last time, which unfortunately we're going to be trading that for something that we did have last time, is we're going to have the ability to change area of interest number one. So by downloading this app, by messing around with it, you can start to visualize things that you weren't able to visualize before. The app is also going to give us a lot more information than Pink Trombone did. Pink Trombone just basically makes a sound and you play around and it's just intuitive. This is going to be a little bit less intuitive. So let's take a look at this app, Vocal Tract Lab. So here's Vocal Tract Lab. Vocal Tract Lab was developed by Peter Birkholz, and you can find all the information about that by going to the website for Vocal Tract Lab, which will be in the video description. Vocal Tract Lab has some really cool features, and like Pink Trombone, we are going to get a vocal tract. And there it is. By having a 3D model of a vocal tract, we can, to some extent, do the kind of playing around that we were doing when we were playing with Pink Trombone. We just have a lot more things that we can move. And as you can see, if you already have figured out what area of interest number one is, or you watched the last video, I can change the length of the vocal tract. I can change it either from the beginning, from the larynx end, and if you were paying attention last time, you know that's area of interest number 3. So raising and lowering the larynx, or I would say more appropriately, raising and lowering the hyoid bone, since the larynx is attached to that. You can do some lowering, somewhat independently, but in new school singing, or anyway, the way I recommend you do things is that you focus on the hyoid bone. We can also change length by, let's see here, sticking the lips out and bringing them back. If you look over here, we have the length of the vocal tract at all times as a readout. So if you keep your eye on that number, and I move, for instance, this point that controls the lips, you can see our total length measurement is changing. You can also go in the app here and you can change the anatomical parameters of the vocal tract that you're using, so you can decide how long is it allowed to go, how short is it allowed to go, etc., etc. That's beyond the scope of what we're doing today. But if you're interested in that, then I urge you to check it out. You can also see that when I move this point, which controls, shall we say, the larynx height, but you can see it's also doing things to the pharynx, etc., because these motions don't happen in isolation. But you can see that doing that also changes the length of my vocal tract. And at its shortest will be when I have the lips back. Let's see. When I have, you see, if I close the jaw here, that's also changing the length of the vocal tract. And if I bring it back and all the way open, that's shortening it. If I just push the jaw forward, it's lengthening. Because this length measurement is basically calculating the shortest path out of the vocal tract. And that's our length. So area of interest number 1 is going to be like the other areas of interest. It's going to be affecting our formants, our formant peaks. So if you keep your eye on this part of the window, you can watch the formant peaks change as I move the vocal tract around. So we're looking at mostly the second formant, but you can see there's stuff going on higher than that, but we're not too worried about that. And let's see, when I move the tongue around here in area of interest number 5, you can see that going up raises that second formant, and then going down lowers it. Up, down, up, down. And the closer I am to, where area of interest number 5 is at its most active, the more I'll be making a difference between this first peak, that's F1, and this first peak, that's F2. And that all sounds kind of complicated, except your brain already is looking at these formants. It already understands how this works. All this is doing is making that into a graph. I'll give you an example. If I start out with this kind of sound, let's see if I can bring that up here. So this should be kind of an S. Well, I know what it's going to be because I programmed this ahead of time. I don't want to seem smarter than I am. So this makes this kind of And if I wanted to change this into, let's say, something like well, or even if I wanted to get closer just in any way to the sound E, then I know just from noodling around. So this isn't like I just can predict this ahead of time without experimentation. But I know that if I send F1 down and I send F2 up, so in essence, if I make this gap right here bigger, I will get closer to an E sound. And I can do that by either saving the vowel ahead of time. But if I take a look here at what this is doing, so this is bringing them closer together. So this should not give me anything like E,
ah,
and it does not. It gets me closer to ah. Now, if I do something that sends them apart, so here this is sending them apart, I should be, and I'm, by the way, I'm making some unnatural shapes here. It's just letting me do it, but these are kind of unnatural shapes. So you can see these points turning red, saying like, whoa, you're going outside of really what's possible. So anyway, if I send F1 down and F2 up, or in any way I separate these a lot more and I play the vowel,
eh,
I get closer to E. Now I have a kind of eh. If I wanted to, let's say, do that even more, let's see. Okay, this is sending F1 down. Let's see if I can. What if I move the lips out? So this is sending F1 further away from F2. And I could try to, let's see, play with the elevation of the sides of the tongue. Oh, that's really separating. So what do I get here? Should be closer to E.
eh,
And it is slightly closer to E. And if I go in and I just pull up what this app thinks is a great E, oof. So I can tell you from looking at it, this isn't going to be great for singing, but still, they program this in here and you can see how far F1 is from F2. Look at the size of this gap. Now, if you look at where I indicated it before, that's how close they were together. Now, if I play this, we get this really kind of, it's a little bit nasal E. Okay, and I'm not saying like do this to get your E sound. I'm saying that when you have more distance between F1 and F2, that does something, and that something registers for whoever is listening to you as that's going to be closer to E. And you can noodle around, do experiments with different vowels, and you can learn something about how do people tend to define these vowels. And then by looking for alternative ways to do what you're trying to do, you can come up with maybe alternative strategies for getting something that sounds pretty close to that vowel. Some people call that vowel modification. I like to say that there are cases of vowel modification, and then there are cases of complete vowel substitution. So you're substituting this other vowel, and the audience will interpret it, hopefully, as the vowel that you wanted, but you have to kind of clear your mind of the concept of making the actual vowel that's on the page, the one that you want the audience to understand. So there's one really big issue here, which is that if you remember when we were looking at pink trombone, we had the ability to control what it calls the throat over here. And when we did that, we made a pretty big change to what the vowel already is. It gave us the ability to really change that first formant from the deepest part of the vocal tract all the way close to area of interest number 3. But now that we're working in vocal tract lab, there's a problem. If I want to affect these formant peaks, and I would really like to get as close to AOI number 3 as I can, and I have the total ability to control how much narrowing there is at AOI number 2, but at AOI number 3, the closest I can get is all the way up here. And you can see if I constrict this area and you keep an eye on the first formant, which is over here. So if you keep an eye on that, when I constrict this area, it does go up. Does go up. But that's not a lot. That's about equivalent to the amount of change we have in the first formant when we move the tongue around here in area of interest number 5. Because as we learned last time, these areas don't occupy kind of discrete areas of the vocal tract. Every wave that's constrained in the vocal tract is taking up the whole length of the vocal tract, and it may have more or less displacement antinodes and nodes, but it's still using at all times the whole vocal tract. And if we're looking at the actual influence or the area that is area of interest number 2, we're already simplifying things when we say it's the whole second half of the vocal tract. It's really the whole vocal tract, but the highest activity is at the end of the vocal tract, and then when we're at the beginning of the vocal tract, it goes to 0. And in between the two is some kind of fall off, which honestly, I don't have the math for that, so I can't tell you exactly what the rate of fall off would be. And honestly, it's not important for our purposes. For our purposes, we just want to give ourselves a kind of map that we can use for exploring. And it's the results of our actual explorations with our own vocal tract and the different sounds that we get that actually inform our decisions later on. We build what's called procedural knowledge. And procedural knowledge doesn't even have to necessarily correspond to objective knowledge in order for it to actually work. The procedure will work because it worked before, and as long as nothing else changed, you just repeat the procedure and you get the result that you wanted. So Vocal Tract Lab has this huge limitation that we cannot really affect area of interest number 3 in the strongest part of area of interest number 3. I did write to the author of this, and I think what he brought up is a little bit disappointing for me, and it's unfortunate, and I think it's got an interesting history. If you're looking, let me talk to you, more directly here. So if you are looking at, let's talk a little bit more directly here. So if you're looking, if you look at some models of acoustics, that you will notice it's really different from this one. And if you pay attention to what the authors are saying, you will find that they talk about Helmholtz resonance, and that they don't really describe the vocal tract as one big long tube that has all formants at all times occupying the whole thing from the beginning to the end. So if you're using that model of acoustics, the issue is that it doesn't work. You go and you try to make adjustments to your vocal tract, and things don't work as they say. And you can point out, for instance, like, hey, okay, if that's true, how come when I do this in my throat, it changes the first formant? And oh, no, okay, it's backwards. Now the first formant is over here and the second formant is over there. And yes, now that accommodates, the observation that, well, actually, when I do this in my pharynx, it's changing the first formant. What's up with that? But now it's wrong on the other side, because there's no way to arrange things that make sense other than saying all of these formants occupy the whole vocal tract. Now that goes, unfortunately, along with the problem, I believe, that speech pathology also has, which is that speech pathology got its acoustics largely from the New York School of Singing. And the New York School of Singing although it does have people like Ken Bozeman, etc., today who are talking about more modern acoustics, if you will, are trying to. All of the actual procedures that they favor are the same ones that were taught by Douglas Stanley at the beginning of the 20th century. There are some things that you can find in this New York school of vocal pedagogy that are now also pretty much embedded into speech pathology. And one of these is that for some reason, you're not going to be using area of interest number 3, because area of interest number 3, if you're going to be using it to do anything, it means constricting this area. Constricting area of interest number 3 really gives you superpowers. But this one guy who pretended to be a scientist named Douglas Stanley, who basically founded all the procedures and biases of the New York school, he believed that any kind of constriction in this area is bad, is unhealthy. That got passed down to a lot of actually what should be medicine that's based on evidence of what works and what doesn't work, has this light is right ethos, and they have this kind of idée fixe, a fixed idea. It's almost delusional that it's going to be unhealthy to constrict this area. Therefore, all of the healthy solutions are going to involve opening the throat. Opening the throat also happens to be the best way for a speech pathologist to get a look at your vocal folds. And it seems obvious to me that in making all of the examples that got put into Vocal Tract Lab as ways to make vowels, etc., etc., they feature this very strong bias against constriction in area of interest number 3, not only as a way to change the resonance of the vocal tract, but as a way to go back and affect the source, so the functioning of the vocal folds themselves. They are against this in a kind of unreasonable way. So that today, if you go to a speech pathologist and you say, well, I get into noisy environments and I try to use my voice, and it's not sustainable. It breaks down in like 5 minutes, and I have all this discomfort, and I'm losing my voice. And so the speech pathologist tells them, oh, well, what you need to do is speak very quietly, back off the sound, and try to release all of the extra constriction and tension, so that you go more and more towards loosening up area of interest number 3, and you go more and more into making vowels only in the way that's pre-programmed into, for instance, Vocal Tract Lab. So unfortunately, that's not true. If you just need the first formant and the second formant to be configured in a certain way so that people understand a particular vowel, then all the ways of doing that should be equally valid ways to produce the vowel. And also, when someone is coming to us and saying, well, every time I get into a fight, I get beat up, we could say something like, well, what kind of fight is it? Is this a gunfight and you're showing up with a knife, or even with just your hands, and trying to get into a gunfight, and you're completely underpowered with your vocal coordination?
Brings a knife to a gunfight.
And maybe you're actually getting discomfort, not because you're speaking too loudly, but because you don't know how to get power in your voice, because you don't know how to constrict area of interest number 3, and then also be able to articulate in the other areas to make clear and very easy to understand vowels that can compete very well with background noise. So, okay, enough ranting. Let's get back to Vocal Tract Lab. What does this area of interest number 1 do anyway? Well, you remember the last time, if we were to label our area of interest kind of loosely on our vocal tract here, we have number 3, and then let's say 4 is going to be somewhere around here, 5 is going to be somewhere around here, and then number 2. And 1 is the whole distance. Well, what happens if we move it? What happens if we adjust area of interest number 1? Well, if this is down here now area of interest number 3 is in the wrong place. But what if we wanted to also look at the other areas of interest? Well, they're also completely in the wrong places, right? Because now, let's say even if we fix area of interest number 3, so we fix area of interest number 3. We fix, area of interest number 2 is always at the end. But now, how far is 1/3? Well, maybe that's in a different place now. Maybe that's like over here. And then 1 more third from that is over here. And that means that area of interest number 4 and number 5 move around anytime you make a change to area of interest number 1. And that's going to have really important effects. In general, when you shorten, let's see, so if we've got AOI number 1 and we shorten it, that's going to send everything up. All of the resonances are going to be raised by the same amount due to this shortening. But I'll talk about how this is actually more complicated than what I just said in a moment. And we'll also see that in the next video. And then if I lengthen, whoa, I suddenly can't spell here when I'm doing this for you. So if I lengthen it, that's going to send everything, all resonances, down. Shortening AOI1 raises all resonances. Lengthening AOI1 lowers all resonance. Let's see, that's number 1. So if I move my vocal tract length, therefore, I should see everything go up, right? Okay, let's do that. Okay, everything's... Whoa, wait, hang on a second. Everything's going up. Some things are going down. Look at that. I know we're not really so concerned about the third formant, but what's going on over here? Because the third formant's going to work, just basically just like the others. So if I look in here, let's follow this peak right here. So keep your eye on it, and as I make these changes, tell me what happens. So everything's going as planned. It's going up. It's going up. Well, suddenly it's going down again. What? And now back up and back down. And now it's going down. What is going on? That's going to be a mystery for the next video. The little preview I'm going to give you is that, okay, let's say we are changing the location of the tongue. We can think of that as doing something with your anatomy, and that's one thing. If we shorten the vocal tract, maybe we didn't move the tongue at all. But where is the tongue relative to whatever area of interest it's been affecting? If we moved the area of interest, but we did not move the tongue, what happens to the resonance? And then doesn't that mean if we're talking about any given motion, does it make sense to only talk about it in terms of anatomy? So for instance, if you're a soprano who's always thinking about making space, and you're always thinking about making quote-unquote space in the same area, and you're not always getting the same result from that. Is it maybe madness to keep thinking of making space in that area as something that always gets a specific result as far as your sound, a specific acoustic result? And the answer is somewhere in the observation of that formant we just looked at. It went up and up and up, just as predicted, because we shortened area of interest number 1. But when we kept shortening area of interest number 1, suddenly it stopped going up. It went down and then back up again. It was like wiggling around and going crazy. What is up with that? And why would that happen? That's going to be the topic next time.